My name is Celeste Simmons, and I'm 28 years old. It's funny how one sentence can shape your entire life, how something so simple can stay with you for years, maybe even forever. "Stop begging for attention," my father said that night, right in front of 43 guests, the ones who'd come to celebrate, to drink champagne and eat fancy appetizers, while I sat there quietly, trying to be happy for my sister. It was the week I graduated as valedictorian. The week I worked endlessly for, staying up late, studying, doing everything by the book, and finally reaching my goal. But instead of praise or celebration, my parents threw a party. The banner that hung in the living room, it wasn't for me. It was for Monica, the golden child, the one who everyone adored. That night, I left. I left home without a second glance and didn't come back for 10 long years. Then, just when I thought I was far enough away from the past, my sister called. It was 1:00 a.m., and I could hear her sobbing through the phone, her voice shaky, barely holding it together. "Celeste, I don't know what to do. I'm broke. Homeless. My license is revoked." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and the worst part, what she confessed about our parents didn't just break my heart, it made my blood run cold. But before I go into the mess that was about to unfold, I want to take a moment for you. If this story resonates with you in any way, please hit like and subscribe. I want to know where you're watching from, so drop your city and local time in the comments. Let's connect over this, because what I'm about to share, it's a story that needs to be told. Now, let's rewind. 10 years ago, June, the week everything went to hell. I grew up in a small, suburban house on Maple Ridge Drive, just outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin. On the surface, we were that family, picture-perfect, smiling at every holiday gathering, wearing pressed clothes, with the cleanest lawn on the block. You know the kind of family I'm talking about. The ones that seem flawless to the outside world, but behind closed doors, it's a different story. My dad, Gerald, managed a regional branch of an insurance company. He wore khakis every day like it was his uniform. He shook hands like he was performing, always smiling, always posing. My mom, Diane, stayed at home, always the first to bring a casserole to church events, always so eager to make sure everyone saw us as the ideal family. But behind all of that, she was just as fake as he was. She kept the house spotless, yes, but she also kept the image of us spotless. It was all about appearances. And then there was Monica. She was 2 years older than me, tall, blonde, and effortlessly charming. People loved her. I mean, you couldn't help but notice her. She played volleyball, sang in the choir, was the life of every party. I, on the other hand, was quieter, less flashy. I spent my time studying and keeping my head down, thinking that if I just kept doing the right thing, doing enough, someone would notice. But no one ever did. There's one memory that sticks out, even now, clearer than the rest. I was 14, just made the honor roll for the 6th straight semester, and I was so proud. I printed the certificate, taped it to the fridge, right next to Monica's volleyball picture and her choir award. The next morning it was gone, just gone. I found it folded up on the kitchen counter, buried beneath a stack of coupons. I asked my mom about it. She didn't even look up from her coffee. "The fridge is getting cluttered, honey." Monica's volleyball picture stayed there. At the time, I told myself it didn't mean anything, but deep down, I knew it wasn't about the fridge. It was about the scoreboard I was never going to win, and I didn't know it yet, but the game was rigged from the start. Senior year came, and I set my sights on one goal: valedictorian. I pushed myself harder than ever before, taking 5 AP classes and working at the library 12 hours a week just to save up some money. I stayed up late, poring over textbooks, writing essays, all while sipping cold tea and pretending like it didn't drain me. My nights were long and quiet. None of it was loud, none of it was seen, but I worked. I worked because I had to, and it paid off. In spring, the school counselor called me in. She said, "Celeste, you've earned the top GPA in your class. You'll be giving the commencement speech." My heart swelled with pride. I could barely believe it. This was my moment. I remember driving home that afternoon, the letter from the school sitting on the passenger seat. The sun felt different as I drove, brighter. I was proud of what I had accomplished, and I couldn't wait to tell my parents. I walked into the house, letter in hand, my heart pounding in excitement. But when I put it on the kitchen table and waited for them to come home, it was like the moment was forgotten. My father came in first, picked up the mail, and stacked it on top of the letter. My mother walked in with groceries and I said, "Mom, I have something to show you." She barely glanced at it. "What is it, honey?" "I'm valedictorian. They want me to give the graduation speech." "Oh, that's nice, sweetie." She turned away to put the milk in the fridge. I stood there waiting for more, but that was it. No excitement. "No, I'm so proud of you." Just nothing. So I asked her again, louder this time, hoping maybe she hadn't heard me. "I'm giving the valedictorian speech on Monday." For a brief second, the room fell quiet. A few heads turned, like a ripple running through a still pond. Monica, my sister, glanced over, but my parents just kept going. And then my father spoke. His voice was steady, calm, but what he said hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. "Celeste, stop begging for attention. Not everything is about you. This is your sister's night." Those words cut deep, and in that moment 43 people heard them. They didn't say a word. Aunt Patricia looked down at her shoes. My uncle coughed awkwardly. Monica let out a short, uncomfortable laugh and turned to talk to someone else. My mother just poured more champagne. I walked out the back door, through the kitchen, and into my car. I sat there holding the letter and I didn't cry. Not at first, I just sat there. I couldn't believe it. I felt something in me snap, like a wire that had been stretched too tight. That was the last time I cried over my family. I made a decision that night. I would never again hand someone the power to make me feel invisible, and I wouldn't go back. 10 years later, I would realize that what my parents took from me that night was far less than what they had been stealing all along. Graduation day arrived. I put on my cap and gown in my bedroom, alone. When I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, I didn't see the girl who had been overlooked for so long. I saw someone else, someone stronger. Someone who had worked to get to this point. I drove to the ceremony, my heart pounding with nervous excitement. When I walked into the auditorium, I saw families gathered, mothers with cameras, fathers with their elbows propped on the back of their chairs. I waited backstage, counting the rows, seeing how many seats I'd reserved for my parents. 4. The seats stayed empty. When they called my name, I walked to the podium. The lights felt warm on my face, and the microphone hummed softly. I gave my speech. I spoke about perseverance, about how hard it is to prove yourself when no one is watching. About how quiet the journey can be, but how worth it is to keep showing up. And when I finished, 700 people clapped, but the 4 seats I had saved for my parents, still empty. But there, in the 3rd row, was one person standing. Mrs. Ruth Calloway, my AP English teacher. She stood with both hands raised, clapping hard, her glasses gleaming under the stage lights. I held her gaze, and for a moment, the emptiness didn't feel so big. After the ceremony, Mrs. Calloway found me in the crowd. She handed me a small envelope, pale blue, her neat handwriting on the front. Inside was a card. "Your parents' blindness is not your failure. Go build your life." Behind it was a business card for a scholarship coordinator at the University of Minnesota. I kept both. I still have them. That summer I applied. I got the scholarship. I packed 2 suitcases and drove to Minneapolis. I didn't tell my parents I was leaving. I didn't tell them where I was going. I left the house on Maple Ridge Drive behind, shrinking in my rearview mirror, and I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't look back, but I had no idea what my parents were doing behind the scenes. And soon, I would learn the shocking truth. Minneapolis was a fresh start. I found a shared apartment near the university and started my life all over again. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked part-time at a financial services office, filing papers, answering phones, doing anything to make ends meet. I didn't mind. It felt real, like I was finally building something for myself. But still, there were moments when the silence of it all would hit me. Christmases alone, eating takeout, watching the snow fall outside my window. thinking about the house on Maple Ridge Drive. Not because I longed to go back, but because there was something missing, something I couldn't shake off. I didn't talk to Monica, not once in all those years. Every time her name popped into my head, I saw that image of her, turning away at the party. She didn't defend me. She laughed awkwardly, like she was just as much a part of the family's game as I had been. I thought she'd chosen their side, and for a long time, I believed that's where she'd stayed. I told myself that building my life away from them was enough. But there's a difference between enough and whole, and I wouldn't realize that until much later. It was a Thursday night in February, 10 years after that party, when I was sitting on my couch reviewing a quarterly report. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the snow tapping against the window. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an unknown number, the area code 507. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but for some reason I picked up. "Hello, Celeste, it's Monica." Her voice cracked, raw, barely holding it together. I sat up straight, a cold knot forming in my stomach. It had been a decade since I last heard her voice. "Monica," I said, my voice almost a whisper. "Where are you?" There was a pause. A long, painful pause. "Bus station, Rochester, Minnesota." It took a moment for the words to sink in. Why was she at a bus station at 11:00 at night? "I don't have money for a hotel," she said. I found a pay phone. I stood up, walked to the window. The snow was heavier now. "Why aren't you at Mom and Dad's?" Her voice dropped. "They kicked me out." I froze. "What? 3 months ago," she whispered. "I didn't even know what to do. I don't have anywhere to go. Can you help me, Celeste?" Her voice broke on the last word. The words didn't make sense at first, not immediately. Monica, the favorite, the one they always chose, the one who got the banner, the champagne. But this was different. I grabbed my coat, grabbed my keys. "Stay where you are," I said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. On the drive over, Monica explained, her medical license was gone, a prescribing error. Wrong dosage, wrong patient chart, a mix-up that cost her everything. The hospital launched an investigation. The state medical board got involved. In the end, her license was suspended and then revoked. It happened fast, too fast. "And Mom and Dad?" I asked. "They found out before I did," she said with a bitter laugh. Someone from the church knew someone at the hospital board. Dad called me before the letter even arrived. I could hear the sadness in her voice as she spoke about their response. And then he told me I humiliated the family. Monica's laugh was short, almost empty. "Mom didn't say anything, she just cried behind him." That's all. I was quiet, letting her words sink in as I drove through the snow. I didn't know yet what she was about to tell me. But something about the way she said, "Please," told me it wasn't just a bad night. It was something much bigger, something I could never undo. I arrived at the bus station, the snow falling harder now, a soft sheet that covered the parking lot. I saw her through the glass doors, sitting on a plastic chair, a small suitcase beside her. Her head was bowed, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. When I stepped out of the car, I could smell the bus exhaust, stale coffee. She stood up when she saw me, and we just looked at each other for a moment. 10 years of silence, 10 years of pain and anger and confusion between us, all in that one moment. "I'm sorry about the party," she said quietly. "I should have said something." I didn't respond right away. We just stood there, the snow falling around us. The past was still heavy, and we hadn't started to unpack it yet. But I knew one thing for sure, everything had changed. We got in the car and drove in silence for a few minutes. The heater hummed and the road stretched out in front of us, covered in snow. Then Monica spoke again. This time her voice was different, smaller. "They didn't just discard me when I wasn't useful," she said. "They did the same thing to you, didn't they? The night of the party, when Dad told you to stop begging for attention." She paused. "You were invisible to them, and I bought into it, I believed them." The words hit harder than I expected. "For 10 years, she whispered, "I thought you were jealous of me. I thought you wanted to ruin everything I had." We were two women sitting side by side, both of us carrying the weight of things we never asked for, things we never chose. It felt like a long time before either of us said anything else. And when I did speak, I said the only thing that made sense. We need a lawyer. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with Monica beside me. The silence between us felt different now, less heavy, like we were both trying to find our way back from a place we didn't want to be. I opened my laptop and pulled up my credit report. My hands were steady as I clicked through the pages, but my mind was racing. I already knew something was wrong. The credit card applications in my name that I never signed, the bills I never saw, the debts that had been haunting me without my knowledge for years. The report took only 4 minutes to load, but those 4 minutes felt like the longest of my life. I scanned the numbers on the screen, my stomach tightening as I read the details. 3 accounts in my name, 3 credit cards opened under my personal information, sent to an address that wasn't mine. My mother's phone number was listed as the contact for every account. The total balance across those 3 accounts, $67,000. Monica was silent next to me, her face pale as she watched me process the information. I didn't need to say anything. The weight of it all was enough. I picked up the phone and called James Whitford, a lawyer who had handled fraud cases before. I had his card in my desk drawer. He picked up after the first ring. James Whitford's office, his assistant answered. I need to speak to Mr. Whitford, I said. This is Celeste Simmons and it's urgent. The line clicked and James's calm voice came on the other end. Celeste, what's going on? I told him everything. The forged credit card applications. The fake signatures, the phone calls from my parents. I laid it all out, the timeline, the amounts, the evidence I had. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then James said, This is federal. This is identity theft under 18 U.S.C. Section 128. Each forged application is a separate count. My chest tightened. I looked at Monica. She was still holding the coffee mug, her knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. Monica, what they did isn't just wrong, it's a crime, I said quietly. Her eyes were wide, as though she hadn't fully grasped what we were about to do. You think we should report them? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't hesitate. Yes. It's the only way to fix this. We need to file a formal report, an FTC identity theft affidavit and a police report, and that means naming the perpetrators. I could see the hesitation in her face. This wasn't just about the money, this was about everything we'd lived through, but I knew what had to be done. Do it, I said. 2 days later, I was at work when the phone rang. Monica's name flashed on the screen and my heart skipped. Celeste, she said, her voice tight. Dad just called, he doesn't know I'm here. What did he say? I asked. He wants me to come home, Monica replied, her voice trembling. He says Mom is sick. Is she? I asked. No, Monica answered. She's not sick. She's had acid reflux for years, He wants me back. He said I've hurt him. He says that I've ruined everything. I could feel the air shift, the weight of his words bearing down on both of us. He's not asking you to come back because he cares about you, Monica, I said, my voice calm but firm. He's doing it because he's scared. He's scared of what's coming. Monica stayed quiet for a moment. What do we do now? She asked. I didn't know, but I knew one thing, we had already started something we couldn't take back. And we weren't about to stop now. The next day, my mother called. The Milwaukee area code lit up my phone, and I knew before I answered that it was her. Celeste, honey, her voice trembled, as it always did when she wanted something. I don't understand why you and Monica are pulling away from us. Your father and I, we love you both so much. I let her speak, let her try to spin her web, let her play the victim as she always did. But when she finished, I asked the question that had been haunting me for years. Mom, did you open any credit card accounts under my name? There was a long silence. A silence so deep it made me wonder if she had dropped the phone. Finally, she spoke, but the answer wasn't what I expected. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice rising in pitch. I didn't back down. 3 credit cards, my name, your phone number, opened 10 years ago. She didn't say no, not once. Instead, she shifted into defensive mode. Are you accusing me? She asked, her voice rising in outrage. After everything I've done for you, I raised you, Celeste, I fed you. I drove you to school every morning and now you're calling me a thief. I'm not accusing you, Mom, I said calmly. I'm asking, and you haven't said no. The silence that followed was deafening. Then she broke it with tears, her voice shaking. I can't believe this. I can't believe my own daughter would say something like this to me. I heard the practiced sobs in her voice, the same ones she'd used for years, but I didn't flinch. Mom, I'm done. I'm done trying. And just like that, the line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone. My hands were steady, but my heart felt heavy. I had asked for answers, and she couldn't even give me that. 2 weeks passed. The silence that followed felt like an aftermath. It wasn't peaceful. It was still heavy, like the quiet after a storm. The weeks dragged on, but I followed James's advice. I didn't contact my parents. I didn't talk about the case. I just let the process work. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Calloway. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but when her name flashed on the screen, I picked up without hesitation. Celeste, I need to tell you something, she said, her voice tight with frustration. And I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this. She didn't sound sorry. She sounded furious. Your parents spoke at the church fellowship meeting last Sunday. Gerald stood up during open sharing and told the group that you've been. She paused, as if holding back the words. Manipulating Monica into cutting off the family. I could feel the blood drain from my face. My breath hitched in my chest. Your father stood up there and told everyone that you've always been jealous of Monica, that you've been using her breakdown to turn her against them. And your mother cried the whole time, Ruth continued, her voice barely controlled. I closed my eyes, hearing the scene play out in my mind. I could picture my father's steady, cold gaze as he performed his role, and my mother, always ready to cry on cue, playing the grieving wife. But then Ruth hit me with something unexpected. Some of the church members reached out to me afterward. They wanted your contact information. One of them said, "You should be ashamed." Ruth's voice softened now. Celeste, I've known your parents for 20 years. I've also known you. The truth always surfaces. Don't let them rewrite your story. The words settled in, and something inside me snapped back into focus. They were trying to twist the narrative again, to make me the villain in my own life. But Ruth was right. The truth always surfaces. And now it was about to flood out into the open. Aunt Patricia called me later that week. The same aunt who had stayed silent when my father publicly humiliated me at that party. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but now her voice was steady, remorseful. Celeste, she said quietly. I should have said something a long time ago. I'm sorry. What do you mean? I asked, my heart racing. She hesitated for a moment. I overheard your father once years ago. He was in the kitchen with your mother and he said, there was another long pause. Open another one, Celeste never checks. I froze. The words didn't make sense at first, and then they hit me. What does that mean? I whispered. I didn't understand it back then, she said, but now I think I do. And that was it. Aunt Patricia was the first to speak up. The first to break the silence that had been strangling me for so long. And she confirmed something I had suspected all along. My parents had been orchestrating everything from the shadows, twisting the truth and manipulating the narrative to suit their own needs. They hadn't just been playing me, they had been playing Monica, too. I hung up, my mind spinning with the implications of everything Aunt Patricia had just shared. My parents had lied for years, keeping us apart, planting seeds of doubt, convincing us that we couldn't trust each other. They had built a life on lies, and now it was all starting to unravel. 3 weeks later, my father called. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and to be honest, I wasn't sure I was ready for this conversation. But I answered. Celeste, he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. You're destroying this family. You need to withdraw the complaint. I let the silence linger, my hand steady on the phone. You need to take it all back, he continued. I opened those accounts because I didn't have a choice. All that money went to Monica's tuition to this family. I did it for us. I was done listening to his excuses. I had heard them all before, 1,000 times. I couldn't keep forgiving him for what he had done. "You didn't do it for us," I said, my voice steady but cold. "You did it for the image of us. You wanted to be seen as the perfect family, and when it all fell apart, you used us as pawns in your game." His breathing grew heavier, like he was pacing back and forth. "Do you want to see your father go to prison? Is that what you want?" I didn't hesitate. "I don't want anything from you, Dad. You walked yourself to prison 10 years ago. I'm not the one sending you there." The words hung in the air between us. I heard the shift in his voice, the desperation creeping in. "Please, Celeste," he whispered. "I'm sorry, I know I was wrong. But don't send me to prison. Don't make me pay for this." I stood there in silence for a long moment, and then I spoke the words that would change everything. "I'm not sending you to prison. You've already done that. I just want my name back. I want my identity back." The call ended, and I sat there for a moment, my hands steady, but my heart was heavy. I wasn't sure if I was grieving or finally letting go. The weeks that followed were quiet. There was no drama, no outbursts, just the slow grind of the legal process working its way through the system. The FTC had processed our identity theft affidavits, and the Milwaukee police had opened an investigative file. The credit bureaus flagged all 5 fraudulent accounts and initiated formal disputes. I went to work every morning like nothing had changed. I sat in meetings, drank coffee at my desk, and analyzed numbers just like I always did. But underneath it all, there was this quiet anticipation, this waiting for the storm to hit. I didn't talk to anyone about what was happening. My colleagues had no idea. They didn't need to know. But things were changing. Slowly. In a way that only small towns and tight-knit communities can understand, the truth doesn't need to be shouted from rooftops. It just needs a crack to seep through. And when it does, it spreads. Ruth Calloway, as always, was that crack. She didn't gossip, didn't share our story with the world, but when people asked, she told the truth. She told Martha Greer, the church treasurer, that Celeste has never been jealous of anyone. And that, right there, set off a chain reaction. Martha mentioned it to her husband, he mentioned it to the deacon, and soon enough, Aunt Patricia called me again. "I've been keeping track of everything," she said, her voice steady now. "Gerald and Diane are starting to pull away from the people they once called friends. It's quiet, but it's there. They're losing their hold." And so, over the course of the next few weeks, it happened. Gerald and Diane stopped attending church services. It wasn't because anyone kicked them out, but because no one was sitting near them anymore. The front row seats they had always occupied, they stayed empty. Not a single person sat beside them. It wasn't out of malice, just discomfort. The community around them had begun to see them for what they truly were. The first Sunday after the truth started to surface, the pastor, Reverend Alan Marsh, didn't name anyone. He didn't need to, but his sermon was pointed, to say the least. He spoke about truth, about the weight of deception within a family, about the sacred trust between parents and children. He quoted Proverbs, "A family built on secrecy will eventually be undone by the very secrets it keeps." It was a quiet blow. Gerald's jaw tightened, his hands clenched by his sides. Diane, ever the actress, pressed a tissue to her face, but the act was hollow. It wasn't real anymore. After the service, 3 of their closest friends approached Gerald in the parking lot. Howard Dempsey, Frank Cole, and the Mayers, people who had been at the backyard party 10 years ago, people who had once believed the lie. "Gerald," Howard said, his voice low but direct. "We need to ask you something. Is it true? Did you open credit cards in your daughter's names?" Gerald's face hardened. "My family's business is my family's business," he said, not offering a denial but not confirming either. Howard wasn't fooled. "That's not a denial," he said. "We're asking you because we believed you. We believed every word you said for 10 years. Diane grabbed Gerald's arm, pulling him away from the conversation. She was crying, but this time it wasn't the rehearsed tears we were all so used to seeing. This time they were real. I wasn't there, and I didn't need to be. The truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs one honest voice to crack the silence, and from there it spreads. 2 weeks after that, Gerald called me. His name popped up on my phone, and for the first time in a decade, I answered. Celeste, his voice was small, thinner than it had ever been. You're destroying this family. You need to withdraw the complaint. I didn't say anything at first. The words didn't surprise me. I'd heard them before, and I wasn't going to fall for them this time. I opened those accounts because I didn't have a choice, he said, his voice cracking. All that money went to Monica's tuition to this family. I did it for us. I could hear the desperation in his voice. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a way out. A way to fix the mess he had made without consequences. You didn't do it for us, I said, my voice steady but filled with years of pent-up emotion. You did it for the image of us. You wanted to look like the perfect family, and now everything's falling apart, and you're scared. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Do you want to see your father go to prison? He asked, his voice now shaking. Is that what you want? I didn't hesitate. I don't want anything from you, Dad. You walked yourself to prison 10 years ago. I'm not the one sending you there. I hung up the phone, my hand steady but my chest tight with something I hadn't expected, grief. Not satisfaction, not victory, just grief. But it wasn't over. The weeks stretched on. The silence between us, between my parents and me, became its own form of communication. My phone stayed quiet. No more calls, no more messages, just the slow, steady ticking of time. In the meantime, the legal process took its course. Whitford kept us updated. The FTC had processed our affidavits. The Milwaukee police had opened a formal investigation, and the credit bureaus were working to remove the fraudulent accounts. It was happening, slowly, but it was happening. I kept my life moving forward. I went to work every morning, buried myself in reports, analyzed the data, and sat in meetings. No one at the office knew what was happening in my personal life. I didn't need them to. But inside, I felt like I was in a strange kind of limbo. There was a quiet tension that came with waiting for the inevitable, for the moment when everything would finally explode. And then, it did. One Wednesday afternoon, I was sitting in the break room, a cup of coffee in hand, when the phone on my desk buzzed. It was Whitford's office calling. Celeste, he said, they've retained counsel. They're ready to negotiate. I felt a heavy weight in my chest. It was a moment I had been expecting, but it still hit me harder than I thought it would. My parents were trying to settle. They wanted to resolve this, to make it go away. What are they offering? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Full acknowledgement of the fraudulent accounts. Restitution for all outstanding balances, $115,000, including accrued interest, paid through a structured repayment plan. They're requesting that you and Monica support a plea agreement instead of pushing for full federal prosecution. I let the silence settle between us. What's the plea look like? Whitford's voice was steady. A guilty plea to identity theft. 3 years of supervised probation. A financial restraining order barring them from accessing either daughter's personal information, credit, or financial accounts. No prison time. I sat there, processing the offer. Monica was sitting at the desk next to me, her head bent, hands wrapped around her coffee cup, staring into it like it held all the answers. We hadn't talked about what would happen next. Not really. We hadn't known what we wanted. But I did know one thing. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about getting even. It wasn't even about punishing my parents. This was about getting my name back, about finally taking control of the life that had been stolen from me. I looked at Monica, and for the first time I saw a hint of peace in her eyes. Accept it, I said quietly. Monica nodded without saying a word. We had both been living with the consequences of their lies for far too long, but now it was time to move forward. The paperwork took another month to process. Our parents entered their guilty pleas in a small federal courtroom in Milwaukee. No cameras, no spectators, just the two of them, their lawyers, and the judge. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of courtroom scene you see in the movies, but it was final. The truth was out. The lies had been exposed. And the weight that had been pressing down on us for so long finally started to lift. The credit bureaus removed all 5 fraudulent accounts within 60 days. My credit score shot up by 190 points. For the first time in my adult life, my financial identity was actually mine. I could hardly believe it. The freedom that came with that number, the freedom to make decisions without someone else's past decisions hanging over me, it was everything. I was no longer tied to the past. I decided to call the property management company in Uptown, the one that had turned me down for that apartment years ago. I wasn't looking for a place to live. I didn't need one. But I needed to say something. The reason I was declined for that apartment 7 years ago, I said to the woman on the phone, was identity theft. My record has been corrected. I'm sorry that happened to you, ma'am, she said, her voice soft with sympathy. It wasn't a victory I had expected, but it was a victory nonetheless. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to rub it in their faces. But it was a relief to finally speak the truth, to take back what had been stolen from me. The process wasn't over yet. But as I sat at my desk that day, watching the snow melt outside the window, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The ripple effect of the truth continued to spread. In the weeks that followed, I kept receiving calls from Aunt Patricia, who had been keeping tabs on what was happening in the community. People were starting to see my parents for who they really were. The church members who had once stood by them, they started pulling away. The front row seats at church stayed empty. The perfect image they had spent years building, it wasn't working anymore. And the truth, it didn't need any help, it just needed a crack, and once that crack appeared, it couldn't be stopped. The final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Over the course of the next few months, the cracks in the image my parents had spent years building started to widen. They had always been the golden couple in their small community, respectable, perfect, admired by everyone. But the truth, once revealed, didn't just shake their reputation. It shattered it. The people who once adored them, who'd always believed their story, started to pull away. One Sunday, Aunt Patricia called again. I hadn't heard from her in a while, but this time, her voice was steady, like she was carrying the weight of something heavy. "Celeste," she said quietly, "I thought you should know. Gerald and Diane put the house on the market. They're using the equity to pay off the restitution." I felt the floor drop beneath me. The house. The house on Maple Ridge Drive, the one where I'd spent so many years of my life, where I'd dreamed of being seen and loved, the place that represented everything they had built. It was gone. And for what? For their lies, for the illusion of perfection they had tried so hard to uphold. "How is he?" I asked, my voice softer than I expected. Patricia hesitated before answering. "He's quieter, your mother too. They don't go out much anymore, they keep to themselves." I didn't know how to process that. My mind kept drifting back to the house, to the refrigerator that had always been a symbol of my family's priorities. The pictures of Monica, the awards, the recognition, it had always been about her, never me. Now, that house was being sold to cover the debts they'd racked up in my name, the debts I never asked for, the debts I had to fight so hard to clear. But here's the thing, the image they'd worked so hard to build didn't crumble in a dramatic collapse. It faded quietly, piece by piece. People stopped coming to them for advice, stopped relying on them. The facade fell apart, not because anyone knocked it down, but because the truth had been revealed, and once you see the truth, the lies no longer hold up. A few months later, Monica and I were settling into a new routine. She lived 15 minutes away from me now, in her own apartment. We saw each other every Thursday, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. Some weeks we cooked together, others we ordered Thai food and watched movies on the couch. We didn't always talk about our parents, but when we did, it was different now. Honest, real. One evening, as we sat across from each other, I finally said it, the thing that had been eating at me for years. "Why didn't you say something that night, the night at the party? When Dad told me to stop begging for attention, you just laughed." Monica put down her fork, her eyes avoiding mine for a moment as she gathered her thoughts. "I believed him," she said, her voice quiet. "I thought you were being dramatic." They'd spent years telling me that you resented me, that you were jealous of me, that you wanted to ruin every good thing that happened to me. And I bought it, all of it, for 10 years. I thought I was the one who had to be perfect. I thought I had to keep them happy. The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. 10 years of silence, of misunderstandings, of being forced to carry the burden of a family who couldn't see us for who we were. Monica was right. She had been the golden child, the one who had been given everything, and I had been the one who had to prove myself. But in the end, it wasn't about us. It was about them. "I'm sorry, Celeste," Monica whispered, her voice shaky. "I don't know how to make it right." "You don't have to make it right," I said softly, reaching across the table and taking her hand. "You just have to be honest. We started therapy separately, in different offices, with different therapists." Monica had to unpack the pressure of being the perfect child, the impossible weight of a role she had never chosen. I had to work through the invisibility, the guilt, and the years of wondering if I was the problem. But it wasn't all bad. There were good nights. Nights when we laughed at things that weren't even funny, when we sat together and enjoyed each other's company without the weight of the past hanging over us. Slowly, we started to heal. The award ceremony came a few months later, at the Grand Marquette Hotel in downtown Minneapolis. It was a room full of financial professionals, 200 of them, all gathered to celebrate the best of the best in the industry. I had been nominated for the Midwest Regional Financial Analyst Award, the top honor given to one analyst per year across the tri-state region. I wore a simple navy dress, professional, elegant. When I checked in at the registration table, I took my seat near the front. The ceremony began, and when they called my name, I walked to the podium. The lights were warm, the microphone hummed. And in front of 200 people, I stood there. I was proud of what I had done, proud of the work I had put in to get there. And when I looked at row 3, just off the center aisle, I saw two faces I wasn't expecting. Monica was sitting there, and beside her was Ruth Calloway. She had flown in from Milwaukee that morning, just to be there. Ruth was clapping for me, both hands raised, her glasses gleaming under the lights. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it meant the world. Ruth had stood for me when no one else would. She had been the one to see me when I was invisible. And now, 10 years later, she was there again, standing for me as I accepted this recognition. I kept my speech short, but it was honest. 10 years ago, someone told me I was begging for attention, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I carried that sentence with me for a long time. Tonight, I'm not begging for anything. I'm standing here because I earned this, and I want to thank the people in this room, and a few who aren't here, who saw that before I could. The room applauded. Monica was crying, not the ragged, broken tears from that night at the bus station, but clean, quiet tears, the kind that come when something lost is finally returned. And Ruth. She stood, both hands clapping, the same way she had stood for me at my graduation, 10 years ago, when 700 people applauded and 4 chairs sat empty. After the ceremony, Ruth found me near the coat check. She pulled me into a hug, brief but firm. "I told you," she said. "Remember this feeling?" I nodded. I did. And I knew that, despite everything my parents had taken from me, I had built something far more important, something no one could ever take away. Months passed, and with them, I felt a shift in the air. My life had changed in ways I hadn't fully understood at first. The noise from the outside world faded, and I was left with something far more valuable: peace. I had built a life that was mine, entirely mine, free from the manipulation and lies that had once bound me to a family who never truly saw me. And yet, despite the progress, I couldn't fully let go. There was still a part of me that couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for the past to come crashing back. But it never did. The weight of everything had finally lifted, and I was no longer carrying it alone. The next few months were quieter. Monica and I continued our routine, seeing each other every Thursday, sharing dinner, sharing stories, and healing, slowly but surely. We didn't talk about our parents every time, but when we did, it was no longer with the anger and hurt that had once defined those conversations. We talked honestly, openly, and with an understanding that we hadn't had before. We were learning how to be sisters again. And then, one Saturday morning, everything came to a head. I opened the front door to grab the newspaper, and there she was. My mother. Standing in the hallway, eyes swollen from crying, coat wrinkled like she had driven all night. "Celeste, please," she said, her voice shaky. "We need to talk." I didn't step aside. I didn't open the door for her. I just stood there, letting the moment stretch between us. She wasn't welcome in my life anymore, but there she was, looking like she had nowhere else to go. "Your father could go to prison, Celeste," she said, her voice trembling, a desperate note creeping in. "Do you understand what that means? We could lose everything." I looked at her, the woman who had raised me in a world of appearances, the one who had built a perfect family out of lies. I wasn't sure what I was feeling anymore: resentment, pity, frustration, maybe all of it at once. But one thing was clear: she wasn't going to manipulate me this time. "You opened accounts in my name, Mom," I said, my voice steady but not soft. "You signed the applications. I'm not the one who made this happen." She took a step back, eyes wide, like she was seeing me for the first time. Her mouth opened, then closed again, words trapped behind the walls she had spent years building. But there was nothing left to say. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Your father, he made me do it." I stood there, not moving, not letting her in. This wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't about any of them. It was about me, and it had been for a long time. Monica appeared behind me in the doorway. She had been listening, and when our eyes met, I saw something I hadn't expected: strength. We were in this together now, no longer divided by the lies. Diane looked between us, realizing for the first time that she couldn't control us anymore. "Monica, sweetheart, don't," Diane began, her voice desperate. But Monica stood firm. "I read the emails, Mom," she said. "All of them, including the one where you told Dad to open another account, where you said Celeste never checks." Diane's face crumpled, her body trembling. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered everything she had put me through, everything she had taken from me. "We're not doing this anymore," Monica said quietly, her voice a whisper but strong enough to echo in the room. "We're not protecting you anymore. We're not keeping your secrets." I didn't know how to respond. There was no more forgiveness left in me, no more room for lies or excuses. It was over. "We're filing the report," I said. "And this time, there's no going back." My mother didn't say anything after that. She just stood there, frozen in the doorway, watching as we closed it between us. For the first time in my life, I felt free. The next few weeks were filled with legal calls and paperwork. I signed affidavits, filled out forms, and submitted everything necessary to make sure the past was officially gone. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought I couldn't bear it anymore. But I did it. We did it. And when the case was closed, when the fraudulent accounts were finally removed from our names for good, I stood there, looking at the final papers in front of me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. But the thing about truth is that once it's out in the open, it doesn't go away. It lingers, like the smell of rain on the pavement, and slowly but surely it changes everything. Our parents didn't just lose their house. They lost their status in the community. They lost their friends. They lost everything they had tried so hard to protect, but that wasn't my concern anymore. They had built their life on lies, and it was unraveling right in front of them. For me, things were different now. I had my life, my identity, I had my boundaries, and I knew I was enough. And Monica, she was finding herself, too. She had gotten a job at a nonprofit clinic, working as a community health outreach coordinator. The pay wasn't much, but she was doing something that felt real for the first time in her life. It wasn't about being a doctor anymore. It was about finding her own purpose. We both moved on, step by step, learning how to exist without the constant weight of our past hanging over us. And then one evening, the phone rang again. It was Aunt Patricia. "I just wanted you to know," she said softly, "your parents sold the house. They're moving into a 2-bedroom rental on the south side." I let her words sink in. The house on Maple Ridge Drive was gone. The house that had once felt like the center of my universe. But as I hung up the phone, I didn't feel sadness. I felt something else, relief. A sense of finality. They had built their life on lies, and now it was all coming down. But I wasn't a part of it anymore. A few weeks later, I received a letter. It wasn't an email or a text message. No, this was something different. Something real. It was a handwritten letter, postmarked Milwaukee. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. Tight, slanted, the same penmanship he'd used on all those insurance forms during my childhood. I sat on my couch, holding the envelope in my hands, and for the first time in a long time I hesitated. I wasn't sure what I expected. Anger, apology, guilt. But when I opened the letter and began reading, I realized it wasn't any of those things. He started with an explanation, or at least what he thought was an explanation. He wrote about growing up poor in a small town, about dropping out of college because he couldn't afford it, about filing for bankruptcy at 30, and the shame that followed him for years. He even said, "I thought if this family looked perfect, then maybe we would be. I thought if people saw Monica in a white coat, they'd see me as something more than a man who went broke at 30. I was wrong. That's when it hit me. The truth had always been there, buried under layers of lies, but now he was finally acknowledging it. He didn't want forgiveness. He didn't even ask for it. But there, on the second page, was the one thing I hadn't expected to read. "I know I was wrong about you, Celeste. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not asking for that. I just want you to know I see you. I should have seen you a long time ago. I see you now. It's late, but I see you." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it up, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the top drawer of my nightstand. I didn't write back. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just didn't need to. I had spent so many years searching for validation from him, from them, and now I realized I had something better. I had myself. The next few months were quieter, but not in a way that felt suffocating. The weight of the past didn't hang over me anymore. There were still moments when the old wounds resurfaced, when the anger would flare up again. But they were fewer and farther between. I had learned to set boundaries, to protect myself, and to refuse to let anyone else dictate my worth. One evening, about 6 months later, I was sitting in my apartment when I received another unexpected call. It was Margaret Thornton, my boss at the financial consulting firm. She had been my mentor, the one who had seen my potential when no one else had. "Celeste, I wanted to let you know that I'm nominating you for the Midwest Regional Financial Analyst Award," she said, her voice firm but warm. "It's given to one analyst per year across the tri-state region. The selection committee meets next month, and I believe you've earned it." I couldn't believe it. I had spent so many years fighting for recognition, fighting to be seen. And now, here I was, being nominated for an award that acknowledged everything I had worked for, everything I had earned. When the award ceremony arrived, I stood before a room full of people, the lights warm on my face, the microphone humming beneath my fingers. I spoke briefly, but the words I spoke were true. 10 years ago, someone told me I was begging for attention, I said, my voice steady. I carried that sentence with me for a long time. Tonight, I'm not begging for anything. I'm standing here because I earned this. And I want to thank the people in this room, and a few who aren't here, who saw that before I could. As the applause rang out, I looked into the crowd, and in the third row, just off the center aisle, I saw her. Monica, sitting there, tears streaming down her face, her expression soft and full of pride. And beside her, there was Ruth Calloway. My AP English teacher, the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. The woman who had seen me for who I was, not who my parents had tried to make me out to be. After the ceremony, Ruth found me again. She pulled me into a brief, firm hug. "I told you," she whispered, her voice filled with pride. "Remember this feeling?" I nodded, and for the first time in a long while I felt whole. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. I had built a life that was mine. I had become the person I always wanted to be, not for them, but for me. Months passed, and things in my life continued to shift. My relationship with Monica continued to grow stronger, though it was still a work in progress. We spent more time together, not out of obligation, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The wounds from our past weren't fully healed, but they were no longer defining us. We were moving forward together. As the year drew to a close, I received another letter. This one was from Ruth. I opened it and found a simple card inside. The handwriting was familiar, and it read, "Still proud, always proud." I stuck it to my refrigerator with a magnet, and for the first time, I didn't worry about anyone taking it down. It was mine, and that was enough. My family no longer looked like the one I grew up in. It was smaller, quieter, and entirely mine. It was imperfect, but it was real, and it was everything I needed. As the months passed, the pieces of my life slowly started to fall into place. I had built something from the ground up, something no one could take away from me. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. My days were filled with work I was proud of, and my evenings were spent with the people who truly cared about me. I had grown into someone I never thought I could be, and that person was enough. But no matter how much I tried to forget about my past, there were still moments when the old wounds resurfaced. Times when the silence of my family still haunted me, when the hurt of what I had been through would creep up from the shadows. One morning, I received a call from Aunt Patricia again. It had been a while since we'd talked, and I braced myself for the news she might share. "Celeste," she said, her voice soft but serious. "I wanted to let you know that your father, he's put the house on the market. I don't know if you're aware, but it's gone." The words hit me harder than I expected. The house on Maple Ridge Drive, the place where I had grown up, the house that had once been a symbol of everything my parents had worked for, was gone. It felt surreal, knowing that it was over, that everything they had fought to protect had crumbled to dust. But the truth was, it wasn't my loss anymore. It wasn't my fight to win. I could hear Aunt Patricia's voice waver as she spoke. "They're using the equity for the restitution payments, moving into a 2-bedroom rental on the south side." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, like this was the justice I had been waiting for, but another part of me felt empty. The house wasn't what mattered anymore. The life I had built for myself was what mattered. "I'm sorry, Celeste," Aunt Patricia said softly. "I never should have stayed silent all these years." I felt a pang of something, maybe regret, maybe sadness. But in that moment, I realized something. I had already moved on. I thanked her and hung up the phone. The weight of it all, the years of pain and manipulation, had faded into the background of my life. I had built something solid and real, something no one could tear down. Monica and I continued to move forward. She found a job she loved at a community health clinic, helping people in ways that truly mattered to her. She wasn't living in the shadow of our parents anymore. She was free. We still saw each other every week. We still had our Thursday dinners, where we would cook, laugh, and talk. Sometimes we didn't talk about our parents at all. And sometimes, when it felt right, we did. But each conversation, each moment, was more honest than the last. We were learning how to be sisters again. And then, one day, I found myself standing in my living room, looking out the window at the Minneapolis skyline, the sun setting behind it, painting the sky in warm oranges and pinks. My life was different now, so different from the girl who had once sat in a car, holding a smudged letter, crying as she watched her family celebrate her sister's success. I wasn't that girl anymore. I had worked for this. I had earned everything I had, and I didn't need anyone's validation to know that. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, reading through some old letters from Ruth, I realized just how far I had come. Ruth had been right, all those years ago when she told me to remember how it felt to be proud of myself. I had done that. I had built my life from the ground up, and it was mine. No one could take that away from me. I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the deceit, the years of trying to prove myself to people who would never see me for who I truly was. But in the end, it didn't matter, because I had learned something far more valuable than any recognition or approval. I had learned to see myself, to love myself, to know my worth without needing anyone else to tell me what it was. And so, I stood there, looking out the window, the city stretching before me, knowing that I had finally found the peace I had been searching for all these years. As the years continued to pass, the pieces of my life became even clearer. I didn't need to look back anymore. I had built a life in Minneapolis that was mine, truly mine, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away. I had made the decision to stop waiting for permission, for validation. I had learned the most important lesson of all. I was enough. It wasn't easy, though. There were days when I still felt the sting of everything that had happened, the years of manipulation, the silence. But those moments didn't define me anymore. They were just pieces of my past, shadows that no longer had the power to control my present. Monica had grown, too. She was finally finding her own way. After years of feeling like she had to live up to everyone else's expectations, she was doing something that made her proud. She had started volunteering at the clinic, helping people in ways that mattered. She wasn't just the golden child anymore, she was her own person. And for the first time in a long while, we were able to truly talk. Not about our parents, but about us, about what we wanted, what we dreamed of. We learned to be sisters again, in a way that was real and raw. And that connection, that bond, felt stronger than anything our parents had tried to build between us. One evening, I sat down at my desk with a cup of tea, my laptop open in front of me. I had come a long way from the girl who sat in the car, crying, the one who never thought she'd be able to move on. But here I was, writing emails, meeting new people, making plans for my future. There was nothing holding me back anymore. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was Monica. I smiled before answering. "Hey, you," I said. "Hey," she replied, her voice lighter than it had been in years. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, you know." "I know," I said, the words feeling different now. "It feels like everything has finally clicked into place." "I'm proud of you," she said, and for the first time in my life, I believed it wasn't just empty words. "And I'm proud of me too." "You should be," I said. "You've come a long way." We talked for a while about everything and nothing like sisters do. But it wasn't until we hung up that I realized just how much had changed. I no longer felt the need to carry the weight of the past. I had let it go bit by bit, and with it, the power it had over me. The next morning, I received a letter. Not one I was expecting. It was from Ruth Calloway. I had always kept in touch with her, even after graduation. She had been more than just a teacher to me. She had been a lifeline, a constant reminder that I was seen. The letter was short, just a simple note, but it was everything I needed. "I'm proud of you." "Always have been," it read. "Keep going, you're doing it, you always were." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of my desk. I didn't need to hang it on the fridge, because it wasn't about needing to be reminded. It was a truth that had already settled in. I had made it. I had built a life I could be proud of. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't need anyone else's approval to know my worth. I had always been enough. I had always been worthy of love, of respect, and of success. The next few months were filled with changes, small ones but significant all the same. I moved into a new apartment, one that felt like home. I started saving for a down payment on a house, a real one, with my name on the deed and no one else's. I made plans for my future, ones that didn't involve trying to prove anything to anyone. Monica, too, had started looking at her future differently. She found her own apartment and took another job that was a better fit for her, something that made her feel like she was doing something that mattered. We both found our way. It was a slow journey, but it was one we were walking together. As time went on, I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed, waiting for the next call or message from someone who had once been a part of my life. I realized that I didn't need to keep looking back to move forward. The people who mattered were here now, and I had already built the life I wanted. One day, I was sitting by the window in my new apartment, looking out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple. It felt like a moment of peace had finally settled over me. I had stopped waiting for validation, for someone else to tell me I was worthy. I had learned, the hard way, that I didn't need anyone's permission to live my life. I was finally free.